We all know somebody who is hard headed. You know, the type of person who refuses to listen to the good judgment of others and needs to find out the hard way despite the outcome. Just plain stubborn. Well, guilty.
Girl, don't do it. It's not worth it. I'm not gonna do it, girl. I was just thinking about it. I'm not gonna do it. I did it. Girl, don't.
Yep, I purchased this Brasilia dresser as soon as I saw it was still available, despite the fact that two other local refinishers turned it down before me. This black and white motif, along with the cowhide on the fronts of the drawers, may not be everybody's cup of tea, but you know what? I'm not going to mock this finish. The lady I purchased it from was super nice and she was very proud of her artistry. She enjoyed this piece of furniture in her home for a good while before moving on. I am someone who truly believes once you purchase anything, whether it be a car, a home, or a piece of furniture like this, you are free to do as you see fit. The good thing about vintage furniture and quality pieces like this one is that they were built well enough to withstand several different makeovers and have multiple lives. For this stressor, this is only the next chapter. Welcome to YouTube's biggest MCM challenge. This challenge includes some amazing furniture refinishers, such as dashboard designs and restorations, flipping drawers, and DIY tainment, just to name a few. Please check out the playlist. Super, super crackly and textured. Oh, you can tell. It's thick. That is some thick paint. Like most people, I try to remove everything I can beforehand just to make it easier on myself, but my number one priority was definitely that cowhide. Removing the hide revealed a lot of veneer damage. I had a lot of heavy swirl marks, veneer chips, sanded through parts, and even a big dent. The base needed to come off if I had any chance of thoroughly removing all of this paint. After removing the screws and doing my best to kind of pry the legs off, it turned out to be a little more difficult than I thought. But with a little bit of elbow grease and persistence, I was able to take most of the frame off. The back legs were stuck in there for sure. I chose to go with Smart Strip Pro because it's able to remove several layers of paint or varnish with one application, and I love that it's water cleanup. One thing to keep in mind about this product is that it does work well. You just have to give it enough time to do its job. It's a little colder. I'm gonna leave it on overnight. See the body of the dresser out there? It's gonna be fine. It's not supposed to rain. And then as for the drawers and the legs, I'm gonna saturate them and then just leave them here in the shed and we'll see what it looks like in the morning. The stripper worked well on most of the dresser, except for when it came to these painted bits, especially the white paint. That paint was very thick. We all know how many layers of white paint you have to paint to get full opacity, so I had to do a couple applications. And after the second one, the paint was soft enough where I was able to scrub it away. Remember I said this is water cleanup, so I had some warm water and a scrubby pad, and I was able to scrub most of the paint out of all the little crevices. After it was dry, you can see here I did have paint left in all these little tiny grooves. So I used a dental pick and did my best to get them all out. It took a while. Most of the time when you strip a painted piece of furniture, you're often left with little flecks of paint that have settled into the grain of the wood. I like to use acetone and a steel wool pad to help dissolve and scrub those away. And you can see side by side before and after how much more paint it removed. And I like to clean off that acetone paint residue with a little mildish soap and water. The rest of the dresser also got cleaned with acetone off camera, and this is what it looked like underneath. There's a lot of different color contrasts within the woods, especially this front. You can see I can even push it in with my finger. It's like it's hollow underneath. So I decided to remove it. It's oak after all, and the rest of the dresser is walnut. You can even see that I'm revealing part of the original band. However, on the other side, there was nothing. There was this big hole. So I decided to try and stabilize it with some wood glue, just so that particle board was stuck together and wasn't compromised. This is the only way I could think of it. And while that was drying, I fixed up all these patches of loose veneer that I found. Filler gauges worked really well to help smear around glue in tight spaces. After about an hour in the sun, this glue was completely dry and hard as a rock. Using an all-purpose filler, Bondo, I filled in that void. Bondo is extremely durable, and it's going to be concealed when I put the new edge banding. Before it completely sets up, I like to file away as much as I can just to reduce the amount of sanding I have to do. Here is the walnut edge banding. You can see it matches the tone of the dresser just a little bit better than what was on there before. We don't need that. In preparation for the edge banding, I like to clean it up with a little bit of alcohol just so I get the best adhesion possible. And then I like to tape my banding in place so it doesn't shift around when I'm trying to apply it. When I'm ironing on my edge banding, I like to place a towel, or in this case a shop towel, in between my iron and the banding so I don't burn it. And yes, this is a dedicated iron for crafts like this. Coming back to the drawer faces, you can see how heavy these swirl marks are. It almost looks like it was refinished with like maybe 80 or 60 grit sandpaper. So I'm going to try my best to remove them. I know this has been refinished before, so I'm starting off as light as possible. With 150, I know that's a little heavier than I would normally start off with veneer, but I needed something a little heavier to kind of wear down those swirl marks. But once I got to the point where they were barely visible, I started hand sanding with 220, and after a lot of elbow grease, I was pretty happy with the result. I finished sanding the entire dresser the same way. There were swirl marks everywhere. So literally, it just took a lot of elbow grease and a lot of hand sanding. And for those unusual areas, sometimes you just have to get a little creative. It was now time to start with some of the veneer patching. I like to spray everything with a little bit of sanding sealer so I can see the true color of the wood. And this particular patch had already been repaired at some points. All I was doing is cutting out a section so I had a groove, a more even shape to fill in with a new piece of veneer. Remember how I mentioned how stubborn that paint was? Look how it bled through and left the pattern on the wood. Crazy. The legs were solid wood, so I started off sanding with 120 grit sandpaper. And it was a relief to see that those markings were actually coming off. I had already spent a lot of time on this piece at this point and was just grateful I didn't have to go through another step. So the top drawers had large areas that needed repairs, which I went ahead and replaced with veneer. But on the side of the dresser, there were a lot of little tiny areas that needed repairs, so I decided just to fill those in with a little bit of quick wood epoxy. So here's how everything looked after being patched in. You can also see that the wood on these two drawers are a different color, and the body of the dresser was actually a different tone as well. So I decided just to stain everything with that teak stain to see if it would make it a little more cohesive. I attempted to fill in some of those patches with a Mohawk marker, but it really didn't do anything. So I decided to try and fill in with a little bit of wood stain, and then that didn't really do anything either. It actually made it look worse. Okay guys, I want to show you this drawer here is a mess. It has so many repairs on it that I I was just going to re-veneer all four of these drawers, but the piece of veneer I have is not enough. So I'm just gonna have to make this work and that work. The stain, I don't like the way the stain's looking, so I'm just gonna paint these. I had seen a hack online where somebody used these Crayola's Colors of the World markers, but that didn't work. That was a complete fail. So I went and got a bunch of different of my little acrylic paints and a paint palette, and I'm just gonna paint this. I think this fawn. I think that's a good color to start off with. So let's do that. So most of the videos I watched on this process I'll talk about starting off with your lightest color first. So I started off with a soft brown just to kind of give that epoxy filler a little bit of color. And then I layered over with a yellowish brown. And once that dried, then I kind of started to blend in a mixture of the two. and then I started mixing my colors on the palette to get more variations. Once the epoxy section was pretty much filled in, I started to blend out into the wood around it so it looked a little more natural. And then once I was happy with the coverage, I started with a very fine paintbrush, making little flecks of a dark brown color so it looked like real wood grain. In the past, I've kind of struggled with this process, even though I've done it in the same way. What I think helped me the most was just being outside in natural daylight. I was able to see the depth of the natural wood, and I was able to match the colors a little bit better than being inside. When that was all done, I sealed it with a little bit of sanding sealer and then continued on with this process on all the other areas that had been veneer replaced or filled in. And you know what? It turned out all right. But there was still a lot of variation as far as the color on this overall piece, so I decided to tone everything. Using a homemade toner made from a mixture of sanding sealer, denatured alcohol, and liquid wood dye. I mixed up a thinner version than the recipe called for, and I did this because I knew that I could always add more, but I couldn't take away, and this was my first time toning anything. So I sprayed it using a very simple sprayer. This is a critter sprayer, and it works great if you don't spray all the time. But gosh, this toner made a huge difference. Would you believe that this drawer is actually this drawer? So can you see where the wood was patched? In the end, I sealed up the entire piece with 2 coats of lacquer, which I also sprayed, and then just moved on to some of the finishing touches, lubricate the drawer glides, add a little bit of moisture to those very dry drawers, and then of course add the hardware. But before I do that, I want to share a little trick with you guys. What I wanted to share with you guys is my method of polishing up beautiful vintage solid brass hardware without scratching it. So I'm not going to use any sort of abrasives, and I'm going to give it the most extreme shine possible. So all I've done here off camera is I soaked these pieces in a little bit of acetone. Sorry, I forgot to film it, but literally I soaked it for maybe 3 minutes, just kind of swished it around. The reason I did that is because vintage hardware usually has a protective coating on the outside, and the acetone will just eat it away. So I've done that, I've rinsed them off, and then here in a glass, I mixed up just a little bit of water with a generous amount of Barkeeper's Friend. We all know Barkeeper's Friend is great at polishing up brass, and I mix it a little bit thick inside this glass because once again, I'm not going to use any kind of abrasives. What I do instead is I just drop my piece of hardware in and I give it a good swirl. This literally takes just a few seconds because the protective coating is already gone. This will polish up super fast and we're done. Isn't that pretty cool? If you see any spots where there's a little bit of tarnish, you can just rub them out with your fingers, and then you want to give it a really good rinse. Now, you could stop right here. And I mean, this hardware is looking beautiful, but I'm a little extra. So I go with one more step. I use this metal polish called Wienel. This is my favorite metal polish. You want to make sure you wear gloves with it and you're in a well ventilated area, but it works great. A little goes a long way, and I squirted out a little too much here. This probably would have been enough for 3 pieces of hardware, but I spread it on 2. Once you have it coated, you want to gently buff it out. What I'm using here is a jewelry polishing rag, and I'm just going to buff that hardware. You can see the tarnish coming off. This is probably the longest part, is just buffing the hardware, but it's well worth it. and this is the end result. You may not be able to tell right here on camera, but I'm going to show you up close. So this one is with the barkeeper's friend, and this one is with the Weanal. You can see it's got like a mirror reflection. That one doesn't, but this is like a mirror. Like you can see my finger in it. Can you see that here? Not really. It's crazy. Crazy how shiny this gets it. Yeah, this is the stuff.